Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Schools are places of learning, of growth, and of safety, a cornerstone of our communities where the echoes of laughter and lessons fill the halls. But even within these familiar walls, there are secrets, hidden stories that refuse to stay buried. Footsteps echo where no one walks. Classrooms hold a weight in the air that no lesson can explain. Faces appear in windows, only to vanish before your eyes. And while some encounter spirits that linger from the past, others face horrors far more tangible. Reminders that even places of knowledge are not immune to darkness. Tonight, we'll delve into first-hand accounts from students, teachers, and all those who keep the wheels of education turning. They've experienced the unexplainable, the unforgettable. And what happens when the place meant to shape your future becomes the source of your nightmares? So, let's get started, shall we? About 25 years ago, when I was only 7, my family and I visited my cousin and her family in Sacramento on a Saturday. They lived in an apartment right next to a cemetery, with an elementary school right behind the apartment complex. This was definitely located in a rough neighborhood. My cousin, who was about the same age as me, brought me and my older brother to the school's playground. My brother brought a basketball and played at the courts by himself, and I was playing on the structure with my cousin. Randomly, my cousin said that she had to run home with no explanation whatsoever. She just took off. For some reason, I didn't question her or decide to follow her. I just sat on the structure next to the slide. Then I heard what sounded like 2 voices, one on each side of my ears, grunting at me. I felt a presence almost like the voices came from 2 people standing on either side of me. My heart dropped. I wanted to faint. I screamed for my brother who was playing on the courts, and before I can even tell him what's going on, he started sprinting off. I ran after him with my shoes halfway on. When we ran back to my cousin's house, my brother said he started running because he heard constant banging against the school bungalow and angry grunting voices chasing after him. We went upstairs to look for my cousin, and when we entered her room, she was sitting on her bed, legs crossed, staring off into space. We screamed her name, and she just slowly turned her head to look at us. She looked like she'd been drugged and just mumbled something to us. We couldn't figure out what she was saying, so we just left her room. My brother and I then told our parents and aunts and uncles what happened to us. They just laughed it off. When it was around dinner time, we all gathered around the dinner table, and my cousin came out of her room from upstairs, acting normal again, like nothing happened. My brother and I remember everything to this day. We've reminded our cousin of that day numerous times, and she cannot remember anything. We brought it up to her a couple months ago, and still, she didn't recall ever taking us to that school. I don't know if she was just so scared that she tried to shut that part out of her memory. She always seemed slightly annoyed every time we'd bring it up, or if she truly cannot remember. It was definitely one of the scariest moments I've ever experienced. In 2004, my parents moved us from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast, and I started 7th grade at a new school. I talked differently, dressed differently, and overall didn't impress the popular girls, or anyone for that matter. If someone bothered speaking to me, it was only to make fun of my accent. By the second week, I'd learned to stay small and keep to myself. When you remove yourself from all social dynamics and become purely a spectator, you learn a lot. I quickly identified who was friends with who had crushes, and who secretly hated their best friend. Then there was Brady, the invisible boy. I envied him most of all. He didn't have to play politics, avoid bullies, or fear the bathrooms. No one stared at him or pointed. It was like he didn't exist. I didn't even notice that we sat next to each other in second period until he randomly asked to borrow a pen. I didn't expect to get it back, but he returned it the next day. A while later, he borrowed it again, and this kept on to the point that we made jokes about how he should just keep it. Little by little, we would talk more until I felt like I was making a real friend. We ate at different lunchtimes, and we didn't have any other classes together, so I would look for him in the hall. There would be glimpses of him from a distance, but every time I tried to make my way over, he'd be gone when I got there. It was starting to seem like he was avoiding me on purpose, so I finally said something in class. Brady said he never saw me and asked me to meet him behind the cafeteria after school, and then he never showed. The next day, he wasn't in class. He didn't come back until sometime the following week. I asked him what had happened, but he just ignored me. And then I noticed there were dark rings around his eyes, and he looked like something bad had happened. So I left him alone. I watched him all through class. I saw a dark, matted clump of hair on the back of his head. It looked like he was hurt. His clothes were covered in dirt and torn, like he'd slept outside. I couldn't believe the teacher hadn't said something to him. Did she really not notice? I tried asking if he was okay, but I did it too loud, and the whole class turned to look at us. I stared at Brady, hoping he would say something, hoping the teacher would see him and help. But then one of the popular girls said, "Oh my God, she's talking to her imaginary friend again." And everyone started laughing hard. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and made a horrendously embarrassing speech about how awful they all were. Crying definitely made it worse, but that's a different kind of childhood trauma. The kind of trauma that comes from a teacher taking you into the hallway to explain that your only friend wasn't real is a whole world of messed up into itself. There was no Brady in that class, no Brady in my grade. That desk had apparently been empty all year. I freaked out so bad that my parents were called to pick me up. My mom made me wait in the car while she talked to the principal. A few days and a therapy session later, my mom told me what they talked about. Sometime in the 90s, a similar incident happened where a kid thought that he'd made a friend named Brady. He was so insistent that our principal, still a teacher back then, looked into it, found old articles where a student named Brady had died. His mom was an addict, and Brady used to run to the school when she became violent. He'd sneak into the cafeteria and stay the night. One day, she chased after him, caught up with him in the parking lot. He tried to make it to the door, but she ran him over before he could reach it. He died still pinned beneath her tire. She was so out of it that she didn't even realize she killed him until the next morning. My schedule was changed, so I didn't have the same second period anymore. I guess the teachers hoped that it would help avoid another incident, and I guess it did. The other kids gave me hell for as long as I attended that school, but I only saw Brady a handful of times after that, and I was really careful to avoid showing it. I didn't need to add any fuel to the fire. To my knowledge, that was the only ghost I've ever had contact with, but who knows? Either way, I'm fine believing that he was my only one. I was always afraid of the sixth sense. I have no need to live it. Last January, I was between jobs and had just recently had a daughter who was at the time about 5 months old. My husband had been working through my pregnancy but lost his job. We were living at my mom's house. I have an education in psychology and some experience as a counselor, so I was looking for the best I could get. But the best I could find right away was a job working as a paraprofessional in a special education department of an elementary school in a nearby suburb. The position was unique to COVID times, being that they needed someone to just sit around the computer room while kids did speech therapy over Zoom. Don't get me started on how terrible virtual speech therapy is, but anyway, my job was to just walk around the school, back and forth between the classrooms and the computer room, picking up kids, taking them to the Zoom room, sitting there for 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the kid, taking them back, picking up the next batch. I was overqualified, we'll say. Some days of the week were scheduled tightly, and other days of the week I routinely had just 2 appointments. The school was a ginormous horseshoe shape, housing 700 elementary school children. I was located all the way at the far back of one side in the pre-K wing. It could take 15 minutes to walk all the way across the building and back when the kids I was picking up were in the older grades. Every day I would make this walk. In the middle of the school, across from the front office, I would always notice and try to ignore this strange rag doll. It was made with construction paper over its face and showcased in a display case. No bad vibes from it, but it just seemed out of place and random. It was there the entire 5 months I worked there, never changing or having added to its case. Onward, weird things happened in the computer room where I worked. The doors in the school use a key to lock from both the inside and outside. The doors do not lock automatically. You absolutely 100% have to manually lock them with a key. We are technically supposed to lock rooms when we leave them empty throughout the day, but no one ever did. So I just left my door unlocked when I went to get the kids. I would go to get a kid in pre-K, so they'd be literally 2 classrooms away, less than a minute to pick them up. My door would be locked by the time I returned. Sometimes I'd be gone longer, but sometimes that's all it would take, 60 seconds. I messed around with this door in my free time, trying to figure out why or how it was locking. And the only conclusion that I could come up with was that someone was manually locking it when I was gone. I asked the janitor that was always around. He said no. I asked if it could lock itself. He said no. So, I came to the conclusion that someone was fucking with me, trying to teach me a lesson for not locking my door or something, passive-aggressively. Well, I don't play that. So I texted my boss, the vice principal, asked to come talk to her when she had time. I explained the situation to her. She said she was sure that no one would do something like that, but she would have maintenance look at the door, and that was the end of it. I come back after the weekend, the door is broken, like off the kilter of its hinges, so it won't shut all the way at all. Guess locking on its own won't be a problem anymore. That school didn't have security cameras in the halls. I wonder if they had any video of me pushing the doorknob down to check that it was unlocked before walking off, returning, and it being locked. Anyway, after that, there was a day where I went to get a kid out of his classroom in the pre-K wing by my office, but they switched the schedule up that day, so the class wasn't in there. I shrugged it off, went to pick up the other kid that also sat in there for this block, then came back. There was another paraprofessional watching her own kids in the playroom nearby, so I asked her if she knew where the other class would be right now. She said she didn't know, but that she thought that she'd seen a kid run in there. Might have been going to use the bathroom. I said okay, went back into the empty classroom. I have the other little kid with me at this point, and there's a bathroom in the back of the class, but it's open. I walk over there, confused, check the room, even look behind the door. There's no kid. I shrug my shoulders at the other little one and begin walking back towards the exit of the room. The bathroom door slams shut behind me. The other little kid jumped out of his skin. I tried to remain calm. The other paraprofessional nearby sees us out in the hallway, peering into the empty classroom, presumably looking very puzzled and freaked out. She asks if the kid was in there. No, but the door slammed behind me when I was walking out. I trailed off, looking down at the kiddo with me, who's looking back up at me with his eyes wide as ever. Probably just the wind, I say. The other para kind of looks at me crazy but shrugs it off, keeps about her business. The kid I was with, I shit you not, whispers, "It was a ghost." And of course I say, No, I'm sure it was just because I messed with the door. You know, the obvious. So, incident blown off. A couple weeks pass by, and I'm in the empty computer room working on art for the walls. It's Wednesday, so it's an early day for pre-K, and all the littles have gone home while the real teachers are in a staff meeting. Someone knocks at my office door. Mind you, the door no longer shuts all the way, so I figure that they don't want to barge in. I get up from my desk 5 feet away and open the door. No one's there. I look down the hallway. No one's there. I go sit back down, more annoyed than anything, and it happens again. At this point, I'm kind of fed up. I do practice witchcraft and have been doing so seriously for more than 16 years, but I have no mediumship abilities or anything like that. I don't deal with ghosts and spirits in my practice, but that's the reason I'm not scared at this point. I ask the janitor if the place is haunted. Man, this guy doesn't skip a beat when he says, "Oh yeah, Rodney." Rodney? Yeah, they say a little boy died here. They named the doll across the office after him. What the fuck? I asked my supervisor about it and she says, "Oh yeah, they told you about Rodney, huh?" I'm like, yeah, well, that could have been in your ad. Okay, so at this point, I've become acquaintances with the school librarian. I ask her about what's going on as well. She says all kinds of people have weird experiences. Night janitors have had things move on their own. One time, the top principal had an alarm go off, showing that someone was down in the basement at 3 a.m. But none of the outside doors had gone off. I guess another time was over spring break. The doll across from the office got ripped up in the display case. His head was laying on the ground, which is why he had a construction paper head now. There were no staff or students around when that happened. Another staff member never believed in ghosts until she saw a little boy run into a classroom and disappear. I guess that's about the extent of things that happened to me there, but I became fascinated. Some staff knew of the ghost, some had never heard anything. Mostly staff who worked on my side of the building had experiences. The other side of the building seemed like a whole other world, totally normal, no ghosts over there. I became the weird ghost girl, I'm sure, always asking people if they'd seen anything. I am not the person to pretend like something's going on, so as to not stir the pot. Of course, I never let the kiddos hear me talking about it. No one other than the janitor seemed to have heard of anyone dying at the school, but people who had heard of the ghost or had experiences did have theories. One day I asked a paraprofessional from another school in the district because at a meeting she mentioned that she herself attended the elementary school where I worked. She didn't know anything about a ghost, but she did say that while she attended, a boy died at school, in the wing where I worked. He had the flu, and his heart gave out. It's actually a very sad story. She could corroborate. She said that they hung drawings of his up in the hallway to commemorate him. Sure enough, among the plaques, there's a framed picture of a swimming hole in a mountain in memory of Ernie, not Rodney. I found a much, much better job, and I quit during summer vacation. But I did tell Ernie, in the silence of the computer room in the last week of school, that if he wanted, he could cross over, and that he didn't have to be stuck at the school. I even had a sacred place out in the country where I believe the veil is thin and that he's welcome to come there with me. Like I said, no psychic abilities here, so No idea if he got the message. But I did drive out there on the last day and put a birdhouse out for Ernie. I hope he's doing well. My friend used to be a janitor at a university. One night, he's finishing cleaning up the bathrooms and he's just about to leave. He hears one of the toilets flush. He tries to think nothing much of it and continues on working. About 30 minutes later, he's closing up one of the classrooms and he notices something from the corner of his eye. Looks like someone walking across the hall, going from one room quickly to another. He goes over and checks the rooms just to make sure nobody was breaking in. And of course, they're empty. He's been working there for years, so he just moves on. As he walks back past the bathroom again, he hears a loud slam coming from inside, like someone slamming the stall. He then hears the bathroom flush one more time. The brave guy goes back in there to see what's up, and of course, it's empty. Way later on, as his shift finishes, he walks to the lot where his car is. He feels like something's watching him. He turns around to check, and he swears he saw some sort of figure in the distance quickly hide away. He worked there for another few years, but oddly enough, that was his only story. I work at a preschool that's in a very old Catholic school building. We're not a Catholic school or affiliated with the church at all. We just rent the building from the church. But we are on the church grounds and right next door to a cemetery. It's still a functioning cemetery, but it dates back to the early 1800s. So anyway, in the 1950s, the school building was the Catholic school. It's a fairly small building with a large gymnasium. It has a stage for performances and other things. And during the 50s, an 8-year-old girl suffered a brain aneurysm in the parking lot and died on the spot. She's buried in the cemetery next door. She's one of the ghosts that's there, and we call her Mary. Now, every person that I know that's ever worked here has had some sort of experience with at least one of the spirits, but it's mainly Mary. A few years back, when we did bus service for the kids, we had a lady bus driver. Once she would get to the school and the kids would go to class, she'd go into the break room, read the newspaper, and have breakfast. One day, she came out of the break room and something caught her eye, so she turned to look. And sitting on a low shelf in the hallway was a girl with a long light-colored dress on and long hair, and she suddenly vanished. This particular woman was so moved by seeing a spirit that she instantly called her mother to tell her that she saw her guardian angel that day. I've personally had toys move around the room during nap time. I've heard kids running around and laughing on the stage when the gym is dark and the stage curtains are drawn. One time when I was the opener and was there at 6:30 a.m. with 3 kids for the day, I had the kids with me in the office to make coloring page copies. I heard footsteps with keys jingling coming down the hallway. I poked my head out to see if someone was coming into the building, but no one was there. I could clearly hear the steps and the jingling get closer, then go past the doorway of the office, and then they would just stop in front of the janitor closet. About 6 months before this happened, the janitor of the school who had worked there for over 15 years had passed away. I like to think it was them, just there to do their job like they always did. I've counted extra feet in bathroom stalls when counting the kids. Other ladies have seen a girl spinning in circles, singing in a room that no one was in and the lights were off. One time, another lady was opening for the day and she'd just gotten to the school. It was winter, so it was still pretty dark at 6:15. She got into the building, and she started opening the classroom up. when she heard a loud noise coming from the office, like someone knocked something over. So she went into the class, locked the door, called the director, who told her to get out of the building and call the police. So that's what she did. The police came, go into the office, do a full sweep of the school, and they confirm there's no one in the building. But they ask her to come into the office. When she gets to the office, there's paperwork, books, folders, everything, all over the place. She said it looked like someone had gone in there and just threw everything from the desk all over. No one could understand what had happened. Another time, we had a tornado actually touch down on the roof of the school, tearing that section of the roof clean off. No one was hurt. Everyone in the school was able to get to safety before it touched. For a solid week prior to this happening, the director kept seeing the old father of the church, who'd passed away years ago, all over the school. Once the tornado hit, she said she believed that he was coming there to warn everyone of the upcoming events and trying to protect his school. At my school, we've watched kids play and speak to someone or something that isn't there. One time, a girl around 4 years old played and pretended to feed someone who wasn't there, holding a full conversation by herself, and during it, she kept looking up at the ceiling and then back down in front of her. It went on for a good 30 minutes. When we asked her who she was playing with, she just said totally normal and pointed, "My friend." Most recently in my room, I have a special needs kid who's mostly nonverbal. He does speak, but not too much unless he really wants to. The other day, we had the door to the classroom open, and he kept walking in front of it and stopping to look out at something. So I asked him, "Hey buddy, what are you looking at out there?" He turns to me and says, clear as day, "There's a ghost right there, and it's scary." I asked him, "Where did you see the ghost?" He says, "Out there, on the ceiling." Everyone who works there knows of the spirits who stay there, and they've all said that it's never been scary. A little spooky sometimes, but never scary. You just learn to work with them and around them if need be, and if I ever open or close the building, I'm always sure to say hello to them when I walk in, and goodbye when I leave. My cousin used to teach at the tribal school on our reservation. Her name's Dora. Dora has a story that she'd never tell publicly, but thankfully has a wonderful, loving, beautiful younger cousin willing to share it for her. I'm not on here trying to put Dora or our tribe in a bad light, and that's why I'm keeping our reservation name out. So, Dora was a 12th grade English teacher at the high school. It's the year 2000 and they're all on winter break. She attends a party at my house and decides to head home around 2 a.m. That night, a dense fog had blanketed the reservation, and already having a few drinks, Dora begins to have a change of heart about driving all the way home. Her house was only a few miles away, but from my house, the high school was just a bit closer. The lanyard with her keys hung on her rearview mirror, so she put them around her neck and then took a left instead of going straight out of my neighborhood. When Dora got to the high school, her car was the only one in the parking lot. She drove around the back where the buses pull in to pick up the kids. Her classroom doors are located on that side, and she parked her car in the bus loop, a stone's throw away from her outside door. The school lights that lined the building were all turned off during holiday breaks, making the building itself completely dark. Dora parked under the only source of illumination coming from the single street lamp located on a cement island center of the loop. Besides that one light, the rest of the property around her is black. There's only one road that leads from the rear of the building. The road eventually leads into a four-way stop, but before that, there's only trees all the way up to the school. Needless to say, the first step Dora took from her car was a leap and a bound to her classroom door. When she gets inside, Her desk is right by that door, so she didn't have to navigate blindly through her classroom to find a light. Exhausted and relieved, Dora actually called me that night to tell me what her new plan was. Then, after we hung up, she pulled all the blankets and pillows out of her emergency closet and made a bed on the little couch in the corner of her classroom. Before going to bed, though, Dora realized that she didn't enjoy any of the amazing food that I prepared. So, her stomach began to rumble, almost as if it was verbally scolding her for being so stubborn. It's a little after 2 a.m., and every business in town closes at 8. But somehow, Dora found probably the only food that would be willing to make a delivery that time of night. She found the phone number to a donut shop right outside reservation lines, and most likely taking pity on her desperate voice through the receiver, agreed to make a delivery to the high school. Taping an envelope with cash and a tip onto her door, Dora gave specific instructions on where to go and what to do. So the driver would go to the back of the school. The classroom's the only one with the lights on. Money's on the door. Leave the donuts outside. Nothing too crazy. Through the curtains, Dora eventually sees headlights pull in, and her confidence grows that her directions were accurate. In the quiet classroom, she can clearly hear someone get out of their car, walk up to her door, do the 2 taps, confirming successful transaction. Before Dora leaves her couch bed to get the donuts, she waits as shoes walk away from the door. Listening for the car door to shut again, Dora begins to hear something else. It sounds like footsteps were heading back to her door, but this time, the feet were running. Then, boom, boom, boom. Dora's jolted from her frozen position, practically jumping out of her skin when someone starts pounding on her outside door. For the quickest moment, Dora thinks that she may have shorted them on the total, but she knew that she gave more than a generous tip. Then, the person banging on the door begins to scream, "Please, let me in. Let me in, Miss B." The B is the initial of Dora's last name. The person on the other side of the door called her by her full last name. Must be a student. Dora also thinks the voice sounds familiar, and that's one thing that I'll never get. How do teachers remember all of their students like that? Well, sure enough, the mystery person pleading outside of her door ended up being a former student of hers. His name's Mark Len. Mark's family owns the donut shop that Dora was ordering from that night. Dora liked the Len family and had an oddly significant memory in her teaching career involving Mark's older brother, Callan. He was a few years older than Mark, and when Dora first started working at the school, there was a kid that kept harassing her like a creep. One day, the creep got way too close to Dora, and Callan stepped in between them, knocked the guy on his ass, basically. That ended the harassment. So, when Dora opened the door and Mark Len pushed his way through, slamming the door behind him, she's almost relieved. But that's short-lived, as the look on her former student's face is filled with horror. Right as the door slammed behind him, Mark ran over to the curtains, started peeking through them and out to the parking lot. Their familiarity to each other wasn't enough to break the tension that Mark was feeling, and a formal greeting didn't take place. Instead, out of breath and continuing to peer out the curtains, Mark tells Dora, when he was walking back to his car, something or some things started to chase him in the fog. Before saying anything, Dora would join Mark in staring out the window into the fog. The mist that had covered the town remained thick, and Dora's car was barely visible from where they stood. She asks Mark if it was an animal that was chasing him, and he said no, he wasn't sure what it was. It sounded like human strides coming at him from directly in front. When Mark stopped his pace in the fog to listen, along with the first pair of legs approaching, he heard a second pair of running feet in pursuit, coming at him from the right. That's when Mark turned and sprinted back to the door. His accounts of what happened scared Dora more than she'd ever let on. Attempting to remain logical in the situation, Dora suggests the commotion he heard was from a pack of res dogs wandering the grounds, but Mark was adamant about what he heard. The steps were too heavy to be from dogs. For a moment, they both stood in the anxious silence that filled the classroom. Their eyes fixed out the window, looking for movement in the fog. At first, Dora thinks her eyes are playing tricks on her, but Mark's gasp solidified that what she was seeing was real. Both of them watched as a tall, hooded figure rose out of the fog by Dora's car. They could see it under the street lamp. The hood doesn't fully cover its face, and Dora swears it had the head of a wolf. The hooded figure turned and stared directly at them before slowly sinking back down and disappearing into the fog. Unable to keep her feeling of dread suppressed, Dora steps back from the window. Mark does too, speechless at what they'd just seen. Dora turns off her desk lamp, once again immersing her classroom in darkness. The hope of being unnoticed is extinguished almost immediately after they begin to hear knocking on the windows of her classroom. Neither of them were brave enough to open the curtains. Mark says, "It knows we're in here." They quickly decide to move rooms. Mark and Dora leave her classroom through the internal hallways. The whole time, they can hear the entity going around the school, pounding on all the windows, shaking all the doors. Dora feels her legs get weak. She's about to pass out from fear, and Mark sees her wobbling and catches her before she collapses. Still conscious, Mark assists her to the closest room, which was the kitchen. After setting Dora on the ground, Mark asks if all the doors are locked in the building. Dora doesn't know. Hearing this, Mark takes it upon himself to independently take off to check all the doors, as Dora sits trying to regain a stable breathing rhythm. It's almost pointless, because just as her heart rate begins to go down, she can hear Mark scream. It echoes through the hall, heading back towards the kitchen. He's screaming, "It's inside. Lock the door." She sees Mark fly past the kitchen doorway. She hears another set of footsteps running through the hallway behind Mark. And when he doesn't run into the kitchen, she has no other option but to close the door and listen to what's going on just outside. Mark screams, and the sound of the chase trail off to another part of the school. Then, silence. Dora stayed like a statue in the kitchen for what felt like hours. She didn't know when it all started, but the clock located over the industrial stove read 4:30. She decided to wait until sunrise before leaving her hiding spot. The entire time she waited, her heart was pounding. Every creak of the school's old infrastructure felt amplified in the emptiness of the kitchen. Every shadow seemed to move in the corner of her eye. She clenched the handle of a butter knife, one that she'd grabbed from the drawers, her only weapon if whatever was chasing Mark decided to return. As the first light of dawn seeped through the small, grease-streaked windows above the industrial sinks, Dora gathered enough courage to leave the kitchen. Her legs still felt weak, but she steadied herself, gripping the wall for support as she tiptoed down the hallway. The building was eerily quiet now. No pounding, no footsteps, no screams. On her way back to her classroom, she passed the computer lab and froze in the doorway. The scene inside was not what she expected. Desks had been overturned, papers scattered everywhere. Most importantly, all of the computers were gone. She ran back to her classroom to see a similar scene. Her phone, which she'd left next to her couch bed, was gone, and so was Mark. Frantic, she checked the parking lot through the classroom window. Her car was still there, but Mark's was nowhere to be seen. Dora decided to call the police, but with her phone being missing, she needed to find the office, as classrooms didn't have phones. As she made her way back down the hall, she noticed some other things. Muddy footprints leading from the back entrance of the school. And sure enough, they led right to the computer lab. Reaching the office, Dora used the landline to call for help. When tribal police arrived, they searched the entire school, but they found no sign of Mark, and no sign of the creature Dora described. No evidence of forced entry either. What they did find, however, was far more shocking. Not only had the computer lab been completely stripped of its equipment, but every monitor, keyboard, laptop, it had all been taken. Adding insult to injury, all of the remaining cords had been cut. The officer questioning Dora seemed like he didn't quite believe her. "You're sure Mark Len was here last night?" he asked her. She insisted yes, he was being chased. There was something out there, I swear. Dora insisted, recounting everything she'd seen, but as she spoke, she realized how absurd her story sounded. A hooded, wolf-headed figure, knocking and chasing them through the fog. The officer nodded politely, but still didn't seem convinced. He told Dora they would follow up with Mark's family and the donut shop, but for now, she needed to head home, get some rest. Dora knew what she saw, or thought she did. As the fog cleared, the reality of the situation began to sink in. It wasn't until the following day, when Mark and his older brother Callan were trying to sell some stolen computers, that the truth finally came out. That hooded figure and the eerie chase were all part of their elaborate plan to scare Dora away from the school, or essentially to let them in. They'd used the fog to their advantage, disguising themselves and creating chaos to cover their tracks, all so they could loot the computer lab. Callan, the mastermind, had even worn a wolf mask and a cloak to sell the illusion. As for Mark, his performance of terror had been convincing enough to manipulate Dora into hiding while they carried out the theft. The pounding on the windows, the running footsteps, it was all staged. When the police questioned Mark, he admitted everything, though he claimed that he had felt a twinge of guilt when Dora nearly passed out in the hallway. "It was supposed to just scare her," he said. "We didn't think she'd take it so hard." Dora, humiliated and furious, resigned from her position at the school. The administration didn't fire her outright, but the implication was clear. She'd let herself be duped, and the theft had happened on her watch. To this day, she avoids talking about what happened, but if you ever bring up that night, her face hardens and her lips tighten. The wolf-headed figure under the street lamp really creeped her out, but for it to all have been some way to take advantage of her kindness, well, that's just pissed her off for forever. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night, and keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. A big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Mary H, Tanya F, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Tony P, Lissane, Arlene F, Adrienne, and TF Parham. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour, YT. Stay spooky.